some kind of policy correction, policy change, and that appears to not be the case at all.
Sahar Shafkat, what about the attacks on Mumbai and the links to Pakistan?
Well, you know, again, none of that investigation has been made public, so I can only speculate on who exactly was involved. But to the best of our knowledge, I think it's safe to say that somehow or the other, the Pakistani security establishment was involved, either indirectly or directly, or even to sort of, in a way of having knowledge of it and letting it happen. And again, this—
What makes you say that?
You know, the groups that have been alleged to be involved are creations of ISI, the Lashkar-e-Taiba and its affiliated social group, the Jamaat al-Dawa. And just as an example of how the security establishment tends to patronize and help out these groups. When the Jamaat al-Dawa was declared by the United Nations as a terrorist organization, the government took a few days to sort of act. And when they eventually seized the assets of this group, they discovered, lo and behold, that all the money had been taken out of the accounts. I don't think this was an accident. I think this was an opportunity given to this group to sort of, you know, clear out its money and regroup eventually. Unfortunately, the ISI and other security agencies in Pakistan have always worked against the interests of the people of Pakistan, and I think this is another instance in which they, again, either directly or indirectly have done that.
And finally, the lawyers' movement in Pakistan, where it is now under Zardari, the husband of the assassinated Benazir Bhutto.
The lawyers' movement is the most hopeful development in Pakistan in the last, I would say, probably couple of decades. Unfortunately, the movement has been weakened since the civilian government took office almost a year ago. And I should note that the United States has remained sort of steadfastly against the restoration of the judiciary, and especially of the Chief Justice. My hope is that now that we have a former constitutional expert as the new U.S. president, that he will see the importance of maintaining the rule of law and of restoring the judiciary. The latest announcement by the lawyers' movement leadership is that there will be a long march on March 9th, and that there will be a sit-in until the judiciary is restored, until the Chief Justice is restored. And most recently, one of the major opposition party leaders, Nawaz Sharif, announced that he is going to participate and support this long march fully.
I want to thank you very much for being with us. Sahar Shafkat, a Pakistani activist and scholar. She specializes in comparative politics and associate professor of political science at St. Mary's College of Maryland. As we go to our last segment right now, in one of his first acts as president last week, Barack Obama signed an executive order setting new rules on the role former lobbyists can play in his administration.
As of today, lobbyists will be subject to stricter limits than under any other administration in history. If you are a lobbyist entering my administration, you will not be able to work on matters you lobbied on or in the agencies you lobbied during the previous 2 years. When you leave government, you will not be able to lobby my administration for as long as I am president.
Despite President Obama's pledge, several former lobbyists are set to play key roles in the new administration. Obama's nominated Raytheon's former top lobbyist, William Lynn, to serve as Deputy Secretary of Defense. Lynn was a registered lobbyist for the defense contractor until July. Several watchdog groups, including Public Citizen and Project on Government and Oversight, have urged the Senate Committee on Armed Services to reject Lynn's nomination because of his ties to Raytheon. President Obama has granted a waiver to Lynn, as well as to William Kaur, who's been nominated to be Deputy Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. Until recently, Kaur was a registered lobbyist for the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. At the Treasury Department, Secretary Timothy Geithner has hired former Goldman Sachs lobbyist Mark Patterson to be his chief of staff. Patterson was a registered lobbyist until April. The National Journal is reporting 14 of the 112 White House staffers that Obama's named had been registered as lobbyists at some point since 2005. The list includes Obama's senior advisor, David Axelrod, and Homeland Security advisor, John Brennan. We're joined now in Washington by Bara Vaida. She is a reporter covering the lobbying industry for National Journal. Her article, Former Lobbyists Join Obama, appears in this week's issue. Lay it out for us, Bara Vaida.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me. As Obama said, these are the most sweeping restrictions on lobbying behavior that's ever been implemented by a president. So it's important to remember that. I think what this shows is that the lobbying industry is just a very big part of the culture of Washington, and that there are a lot of people who have worked on policy that end up lobbying from time to time. And there's such a mix between lobbying and policy that it shows how difficult it is to draw a very bright line between lobbying and policy. Lobbyists, you have to remember, do have a lot of expertise. They have a lot of information. They do play an important role in how policies develop. So that's, you know, an important sort of thing to remember when we talk about lobbying. Obama did campaign on a pledge that he would limit the role of lobbyists in his White House. And as I noted, there are 14 or 13 people actually who have had lobbying in their background who are now White House staff, and there's probably more at this point. But there's hundreds of positions already that he has named, so he can say that he's limited so far the role of lobbyists. But it's important to pay attention to how many of these folks have had lobbying in their background and keep track of it to make sure he keeps with his pledge, you know, not to have lobbyists dominating his White House, as opposed to what we saw with the previous administration.
What about Raytheon's former top lobbyist, William Lynn, serving as Deputy Secretary of Defense?
Yes, I mean, that has certainly caused a lot of heartburn in the watchdog community. They're very concerned about that. They don't see how it's any way possible that Mr. Lynn can do his job without doing something that's going to have some kind of impact on the bottom line at Raytheon, and that's what they're greatly concerned about. And that was what happened in the Bush administration. To remember, a lot of these rules that Obama has implemented are a reaction to what happened during the Bush years. We saw what happened in the Interior Department. Stephen Giles got embroiled in something with a former lobbyist named Jack Abramoff, who's now in jail, and that he had gotten people in the Interior Department to, you know, trade on favors for him, for his clients, and that's what this is aimed at. Mr. Lynn has sent a letter apparently to the Hill this week trying to lay out that whatever he does that may have some effect on Raytheon, he will run it by the General Counsel's office before he does anything. And McCain and some, I think Senator Grassley as well, have both said, you know, that's just too vague. We want something more specific.
White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs was questioned Wednesday about the role lobbyists will have in the new administration.
Is the president bothered at all that Secretary Geithner has picked as his chief of staff a former lobbyist for Goldman Sachs, who has obviously that company has benefited from government bailouts? Doesn't that punch a hole in what the president signed just last week in terms of preventing lobbyists like that from serving in his administration?
No, the president. Well, let's step back and talk about the broader issue of ethics and transparency in this administration. As I said from this podium, and as you all read in papers throughout the country, that the ethics and transparency executive orders that the president signed the first day institute a policy that covers this administration unlike any policy we've seen in any previous administration in the history of our country.
But if it's a strong policy, even if it's a strong policy, does it mean anything if people are getting waivers to go around it?
Those very same people that labeled that policy the strongest of any administration in history also said they thought it made sense for a limited number of waivers to ensure that people could continue to serve the public.
And that was Robert Gibbs, the new press secretary. Bharavita, what about Treasury Department Secretary Tim Geithner hiring former Goldman Sachs lobbyist Mark Patterson to be his chief of staff? Patterson, a registered lobbyist until April.
Again, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, Patterson was lobbying up until about March of 2008, and there's definitely a question, how can he do his job without doing something that may have an impact on Goldman Sachs? It's almost impossible. So I think it's totally fair to raise these questions. And I think the administration is going to keep getting hit with these questions until they explain how they're deciding how they're implementing these waivers. They haven't explained that, what their standard is. I have asked them that. They don't want to answer it. You heard the response. That's the response we tend to get, which is we've said we'll do a few waivers in the cases where we think there's unique experience of this person and that a waiver should be granted. I guess, you know, people will be watching this very carefully, and people will have to decide, are the exceptions okay or not? I think the administration really needs to explain what standard they're using, and that is not clear.
Cara Vita, I want to thank you very much for being with us, reporter covering the lobbying industry for National Journal. And that does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Sharif Hodokadus, Aaron Mata, Angela Kamet, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Massoud, Rabbi Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Peter Curries are our engineers. Special thanks also to Becca Staley, Nick Gala, Hugh Grant, Angie Kiefer, Samantha Chambly, Jay Solnor, John Randolph, Jose Miranda, Laura Chipley, Travis Collins, Kieran Krug Meadows. We have a job opening here at Democracy Now! Web Store Manager. We're particularly looking for someone, hopefully, with e-commerce experience. You can look at the details of that job description at our website.